This lecture is part of our Quinn Family Lecture Series, which has been made possible to us at the Center by the generosity of Ed and Kathleen Quinn. Their generosity really has allowed us to have these 4 major endowed presentations each year where we can bring in major figures like Father Joncas. It's indeed my pleasure to welcome Father Michael Joncas here among us, not only to this event, but to the college in general. I believe it's your first visit.
It is.
And I'll say a few things about Father Joncas and then perhaps something he doesn't want me to tell you.
Oh.
Which is...
Fortunately, I can offer absolution.
Unless you were complicit in the crime.
Exactly correct, yes.
Now I'm red. Father Joncas studied at the University of St. Thomas, the University of Notre Dame, and San Anselmo in Rome. He is a prolific liturgical composer and author who has composed over 20 collections of liturgical music, and who has written at least now 3 books. More? 4, that's what I thought. He needs to update his CV.
Mm-hmm.
The Catechism of the Catholic Church on Liturgy and Sacraments, Preaching the Rite of Christian Initiations, and From Sacred Song to Ritual Music. What's the 4th?
Study Guide to the Order of Christian Mass.
Yes. Yeah. This lecture is especially important, I think, for my sensibilities as both a musician and a liturgist in what we do in terms of our own spirituality and if you will, hitting the frontiers of the evangelization process here, not only in this area, but throughout the United States. I first met Father Joncas at an event for NPM back in 1990, I believe it was 1998, where he was a colloquium that I was attending, and he was presenting on the theological aesthetics of music, and you were debating Father Mannion. It was very good. But the lasting impression I have of Father Joncas is something that happened at a Pittsburgh National Convention for NPM, and those of you who are from Rhode Island and the area know what happened. Before the convention Eucharist, we had gone out for dinner. I bought a new white shirt, new khaki pants. I was very proud of the fact that I found something that fit. We had a wonderful dinner at this Chinese restaurant, and just as we were getting ready to leave, the waiter put his hand over top of my shoulder, picked up the sweet and sour pork on the other side of me, and you know what happened. And then spilled it down this nice new white shirt. Oh. It's then when I found out what Tide to Go is. As one of the members of our contingent very quickly pulled it out of her purse and said, "Father, this will work." Off to the bathroom I went, soaking my shirt with Tide to Go and water, thinking this will never, ever come out, and sure enough, it did. I am now a card-carrying member of Tide to Go. However, now my great, crisp, white, clean shirt is now soaking wet, and we have to leave for Mass. So off we go to get back to the convention center, get back to the place where we're having Mass, and of all the people who sits next to me that evening, it's Father Michael Joncas. And I'm steaming. Because my shirt is messed up. I look like a slob. And Father Joncas is sitting next to me. And I can't remember now if it was either before Mass began or I believe it was actually after Mass. You turned to me and you said, "Are you okay? You look distressed." Mm-hmm. And the very fact that you noticed made my day. I was like, he cares about me. Or it was just a simple fact that I was distracting him from celebrating the Mass. But regardless of what the reason was, it had a lasting impact on me and a lasting impression. I was very happy when earlier this year I asked Father Joncas if he would come and speak with us, and indeed he has said yes. So without further ado, I'd like to present Father Joncas, who will present his lecture, "I Will Not Let You Go Unless You Bless Me." I don't think I'll let you go ever. The Spiritual Journey in Catholic Imagination, Father Michael Joncas.
Thank you. That's wonderful. That is so wonderful. I didn't remember that. But, oh no. And the truth of the matter is, it is a delight to be here. Minnesota right now is scheduled to have another 6 inches of snow. So I couldn't be happier. This is glorious. Well, I do have 3 preliminaries before I launch into it today. The first is that, as you can tell, I am a Midwestern Minnesotan, and yes, I talk funny. I can't help it. If you've seen the movie Fargo, that's the accent that I have. I've tried to eradicate it, but, you know. And here I am on the sophisticated East Coast, center of culture. I mean, this is difficult. So I hope you'll simply forgive me for being a bumpkin. That's the way life is. Now, number 2, I am a diocesan priest, not a Dominican. But you need to know that I have a great admiration and respect for Dominicans. I've worked with them. And in fact, the motto of handing on what one has contemplated is at the core of my life. I do also claim to be a Thomist. Now, I have to say, I'm a Lonerganian Thomist. And so there are some Dominicans who hold that they are not really Thomists, but I am. And so I do have this admiration. Now, here's the third and most important preliminary. My presentation today will try to incorporate both content, that is, exploring a schema for the spiritual journey in the Catholic imagination, and examples from various arts, literature, and we're going to be looking at just one author, visual art, multiple, and music. And we're only going to be looking at one composer, me. But the title for this presentation will not become clear until the very end of the presentation. So I will not let you go until you bless me. Hang on to that. It'll take all this hour until we get to understand it. Here we go. Now, I want to begin with a reading, and I've put it up so as I'm reading it, you can see this text. I do not know, is there anyone here from English who knows how to pronounce his name? Is this Michael Chabon or Michael Chabon? I don't know. Well, okay, no trouble. I'm going to use Chabon. As far as I know from his writing, this is a man who loves to go in the interface between popular culture and high art. He's absolutely a magnificent writer. But the reason I'm reading this to you today is because it gives exactly the framework for what I want to say to you in this hour. Here we go. The world is so big, so complicated, so replete with marvels and surprises that it takes years for most people to begin to notice that it is also irretrievably broken. We call this period of research childhood. There follows a program of renewed inquiry, often involuntary, into the nature and effects of mortality, entropy, heartbreak, violence, failure, cowardice, duplicity, cruelty, and grief. The researcher learns from their histories and their bitter lessons by heart. Along the way, he or she discovers that the world has been broken for as long as anyone can remember, and struggles to reconcile this fact with the ache of cosmic nostalgia that arises from time to time in the researcher's heart, an intimation of vanished glory, of lost wholeness, a memory of the world unbroken. And we call the moment at which this ache first arises adolescence. The feeling haunts people all their lives. Everyone sooner or later gets a thorough schooling in brokenness. The question becomes, what to do with the pieces? Some people hunker down atop the local pile of ruins and make do, Bedouin tending their goats in the shade of shattered giants. Others set about breaking what remains of the world into bits ever smaller and more jagged, kicking through the rubble like kids running through piles of leaves. And you really know this from Boston. And some people, passing among the scattered pieces of that great overturned jigsaw puzzle, start to pick up a piece here, a piece there, with a vague yet irresistible notion that perhaps something might be done about putting the thing together again. Two difficulties with this latter scheme at once present themselves. First of all, we have only ever glimpsed, as if through half-closed lids, the picture on the lid of the jigsaw puzzle box. And second, no matter how diligent we've been about picking up pieces along the way, we will never have anywhere near enough of them to finish the job. The most we can hope to accomplish with our handful of salvaged bits, the bittersweet harvest of observation and experience, is to build a little world of our own, a scale model of that mysterious, original, unbroken, half-remembered world. Of course, the worlds we build out of our store of fragments can only be approximations, partial and inaccurate. A representation of the vanished whole that haunts us, they must be accounted failures. And yet, in that very failure, in their gaps and inaccuracies, they may yet be faithful maps, accurate scale models of this beautiful and broken world. We call these scale models works of art. You now know what I want to talk about this afternoon. I want to talk about the spiritual journey. I want to talk about childhood and adolescence and maturity. I want to talk about wonder. And I want to talk about the wound at the heart of the world. And I want to talk about trying to put it back together again. Because I'm going to be very straightforward with you. As a Catholic Christian, I believe something slightly different than Michael does. I believe that not of my own strength, but because of grace, there is the possibility to at least herald a world that's going to be put back together. And I see visions of it from the horizon that is the edge of the future. So, here we go. Childhood. Here's our first visual image. Now, this image is taken by an iPhone. And it was taken by the father of that child. And it was taken in a horrible temple of commerce found in Minnesota. Yes, the Mall of America. Which tells you that even in the midst of the most horrible, horrible places of commerce, grace can happen. This is a plexiglass wall in the midst of which is water, and bubbles are appearing in it. And the little kid that you see there is Liam, whom I baptized a year ago. And behind him is his mother, Therese. And can you see him reaching up to the bubbles? Childhood. It seems to me that the spiritual journey of childhood is the intuition of wonder and delight and awe in being. We theologians call it adoration. It's an intuition of the capital B being, generating and sustaining all of the small b beings that are what we actually experience sensually. There is a reflexiveness that happens when we move from adoration to thanksgiving. My sister, a much better theologian than I, taught this to one of my nephews. When I brought home as a gift, well, brought to her house as a gift for him one Christmas, a dinosaur. He unwrapped it and then went running around like a little squealing pig. See what I got, see what I got, see what I got, see what I got, see what I got. At which point Kathy, my sister, said to him, now what do you do you go to Uncle Michael and say, thank you. Welcome to the difference between adoration, see what I got, see what I got, see what I got, see what I got, and thanksgiving. The reflexive act of moving back to the source of, see what I got, see what I got, see what I got. An experience of union. Did you see how Therese stands behind her child? That he's there exploring, secure in the awe. Now, the Catholic imagination explores childhood. It sees it sacramentally, that the sensed is not something to be despised, that the sensed is wonderful, that the sensed comes to us as sign, that it is always more than meets the eye. But it's also cause, that it is a world of enchantment. We love this world that's given to us first and foremost as garden, if we use the mythos of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So, how do artists move us toward this? Well, I'm about to do something that English teachers are going to hate, but it's the only way I can make sure that this is going to connect to those of you who may not know this particular poet and his poetry. It's one of my heroes, Gerard Manley Hopkins, Victorian poet, British, moved into exile into Ireland, grieves over it, but still writes magnificent poetry. Now, when I say that I'm going to do something awful, I'm going to have to show you a little bit before I actually do the poem with you of the language that he uses and the progress of thought, because his playing with language is so amazing, so sparking with meaning, so engaging of the imagination that it's difficult, but it's also wonderful. So, in this poem, Pied Beauty, you can see one of the words right off the bat. We don't use the word pied very often. 2 or more colors in blotches. Okay, imagine that. He also uses the word dappled. That's one of his favorite words. Marked with spots or rounded patches. Okay? And here's the progress of thought. This is basically a sonnet, so you'd expect a sonnet to have 8 lines followed by 6 lines. Well, when you look at this, count the number of lines and figure out what's going on. You also expect certain kind of end rhymes in it. Well, take a look at the end rhymes and see what's going on. We'll talk about that when we get to the end of the poem. But here's the progress of thought. In stanza 1, the poet says, let's praise God for things that are mixtures of colors, that are pied and dappled. And he gives you all these examples. Multi-hued skies, living trout skins under the water, chestnuts split open so you see the meat as well as the shell, living coals split open so you see the burning red and the black, finches with their wings sparkling, agricultural fields, but some of them are black and some of them are bright green and some of them are maybe brown, all these different colors. And finally, all the implements human beings use for their work. He gives you all of those examples. And then he moves to the second stanza and says, praise God who creates and sustains all of these things. Ha-ha. And here it's a more abstract reflection on the contraries that make up human experience in the created world. Now, what's glorious about the poem is the poet is almost like a child. He is simply dazzled by everything that's there, but then can make the reflexive move of thanking God. Ready for the poem? Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal, chestnut falls, finch's wings, landscaped, plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades, their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter original, spare, strange. Whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim. He fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. Stunning poem. So what kind of a sonnet is this? Did you see that the first stanza, which is supposed to have 8 lines, doesn't? And did you see that the rhyme scheme, which is supposed to follow a certain pattern, either Italian or Shakespearean, doesn't? And do you see that the second stanza, which is supposed to have 6 lines, doesn't? And it also has one tiny line at the end, praise him, which doesn't parallel any of the other lines that show up. Guess what? This is a sonnet which is original, counter, strange. Yeah. The very poem itself, in its form, has become an example of the very thing that Hopkins is celebrating. And what does he celebrate? The God who, in his great unity, delights in the variety of creation. Wow. Catholic imagination. That kind of imagination. I love seeing Liam's face, right? And you see it through the bubbles, and you see Mom in the back, and you see her delight, not only in the bubbles, but you see her delight in him, delighting. Welcome, I think, to the Catholic imagination, looking at God. Now, I'm going to move to music, and this becomes a little more complex because I have to put on the music. And you're going to see the text as we go along. This is Michael Joncas writing as a child, okay? And it's a setting of one of the Psalms that we use especially during Eastertide. So you've probably sung this, maybe not in my setting. There we go. And I'm going to try to show you the text as we go along. So let's just listen to it and then see how this music might bring us into an experience of childhood wonder and awe along with the psalmist. Up a little bit. There we go. That's good. Not too loud. That's good. See? Well, you can tell. There's nothing subtle about that piece at all, right? This is pure rejoicing. It's awe. It's a statement of God's a delight, right? The Lord's right hand is struck with power. The Lord's right hand is exalted. I shall not die. I shall live. This is the world the way it's supposed to be. And frankly, the musical setting is likewise not at all subtle. There's no struggle going on in it. Very same 6/8 pulse all the way through it. The only thing that makes it kind of fun is that there are a few jazz chords tossed into it, right? That's about it. Now, we're going to shift at this point from the childhood experience and the Catholic imagination engaging it to adolescence. Different stage. I think the spiritual journey in adolescence is something that in some people shuts down the spiritual journey. The engagement with the brokenness of the world, the wound at the heart of the world, for some people shuts down the possibility of further spiritual growth, rather than seeing it as an important step further in the spiritual journey. So, it seems to me that adolescence gives us an intuition of the wound at the heart of the world and of one's own woundedness as a result of the wound at the heart of the world. This is, if I can be kind of straightforward, this is when that free-floating kind of love and union you might have with your parents breaks down. When males who used to absolutely love having mom cuddle and kiss them suddenly are uncomfortable with that, right? And that all breaks down. There's something different. You're falling from grace, an intuition of a breaking down of union. There's an awakening also of one's own contribution or contributions to wounding the world and the self. It's an awareness of guilt and shame. Not the kind of quick, oh, I'm so sorry for that happens in childhood, and then you move on and play. But the kind of wounding that stays with you, a kind of shame, a kind of guilt that you carry with you. A wonder if you can ever get out from underneath these things. And the challenge in adolescence is whether or not you can find the spiritual insight, strength, power, grace to surrender to a redeeming power outside of yourself, rather than simply idolizing your ego. Put me in, coach. I'm going to save myself. I'm going to just keep getting stronger and more virtuous and more powerful until I'm perfect. Frankly, the spiritual life is just the same as Weight Watchers or a good weight program. I can do it. Put me in. The Catholic imagination in adolescence is wonderful because it has a clear-eyed depiction of the world's brokenness. Catholic imagination is not romantic on the one hand. It's not perfumed. It never has a sense that when the movie ends and you hear the line, they lived happily ever after, Catholic imagination doesn't believe that. Catholic imagination knows better. But it also doesn't assume that everything is tragedy. It's clear-eyed. It's also not shocked by the pervasiveness of sin. It hopes and believes ultimately that sin will not triumph, but it's not shocked when the evidence of sin comes forward. It's not shocked. And best of all, the Catholic imagination enters into the divine compassion for this broken world and broken selves. Now let me try to illustrate this. We're going to go again to Gerard Manley Hopkins. Magnificent poem, Spring and Fall to a Young child. And in this, we don't have the same problem we had of a truncated sonnet and a playing with a form. This is almost all couplets, simply couplets, and one part of it, there are 3 lines that rhyme. But fundamentally, it's just a series of couplets. And most of it's pretty easy to understand. He doesn't use difficult language, probably because the idea is we're speaking to a child. Now, in fact, Golden Grove might be a little unclear. It's really a group of trees in autumn with golden leaves. There's a reference to wan wood, so pale branches of trees that have lost their leaves, and leaf meal, the kind of mulch that happens when leaves in autumn fall down in a wet medium and turn muddy. But what's the progress of thought? 3 basic moves. The poet, who is mature now, observes this young girl right on the cusp between childhood and adolescence. It's magnificent because you see her in the poem right there, where she's beginning to intuit the wound at the heart of the world and the wound in her. She's sad, and she doesn't know why. It's autumn, and she's sad. The poet then reflects from his maturity that in autumns to come, he knows that she will no longer have that same sensitivity. She'll walk out in the woods and see leaves on the ground, and it really won't matter to her much anymore at all. That wound, the sensitivity to it, characteristic of adolescence, will simply disappear. She'll become an adult. She'll move beyond that feeling of sensitivity. But the poet then declares that ultimately all human sorrow derives from a single source, our consciousness of our own contingency and finitude, so that all our mourning is grounded in mourning ultimately for our own death. What this young girl in adolescence is grieving is not just leaves falling from a tree, but the fact that she and all she knows is going to die. Margaret, are you grieving over Golden Grove unleaving? Leaves, like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for? Can you? As the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of wan wood, leaf meal lie. And yet you will weep and know why. Now, no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same. Nor mouth had, nor mind expressed. What heart heard of, ghost guessed. It is the blight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for. Now, visually, visual art, Catholic imagination, I'm actually taking something from our American experience. W. Eugene Smith was a photojournalist of extraordinary reputation. He worked for Life magazine, and the one image I'm going to show for you was a transformative experience for me at age 12. This was shown in Life magazine in 1972. I'm 12 years old at that point and seeing this. Oh no, I'm not. I'm 21 actually. Okay, so I'm seeing this. This is Tomoko Uemura in her bath. Now let me give you the background to this. Eugene Smith and his wife had been living in Minamata, Japan for 3 years. He lived there from 71 to 73 and was trying to document what was called Minamata disease. This photo essay came out in the middle of that, in 1972. It depicts Ryoko Uemura holding her 21-year-old daughter. That's why it was so powerful for me. I now realize that. In a traditional Japanese bathing chamber. So both the mother and the child are naked. They're in the bathing chamber together. Tomako has been blind, physically deformed, and mentally incapacitated from her birth because of mercury poisoning from the shellfish and fish that her mother had consumed from the waters of the Bay of Minamata, which had been polluted by the Chiso Corporation of Japan, which had from 1909 been dumping this toxic waste into the land. You should know that Smith himself was attacked by employees of the company who wounded one of his eyes that then deteriorated, so he was never again able to do the same kind of photojournalist work. He died, never recovering it, died in 1978. Now, I'm going to be silent for about a minute, and I just want you to look at this picture. And then I want to talk about why I think this enters into the Catholic imagination, okay? And if we could flip off the lights so that you can get a better sense of how it appears, because it's a black and white photo. Thank you. Okay? I believe we are here in the presence of the Holy. To see the wound at the heart of the world in the body of that child. To see her blind eyes looking up. To see the serenity on the mother's face. The tenderness. Who has held her day after day after day. And as a Christian to look at that and to see in it the Pietà, the Christ who has identified himself with every broken person. This too is the Catholic imagination. It takes seriously the brokenness of the world. And the paradox, the horror in this is also transformed by the beauty of the photograph. It is radiant. The music that I want to connect to this is a setting of Psalm 104. Lord, send out your Spirit. Now this is a setting that I did after I came down with Guillain-Barré syndrome. This is exactly 10 years ago. I spent 3 months in Mayo Clinic, 2 months of that on a ventilator. I was paralyzed. At one stage, the only thing that worked on me was one eye. I could blink that eye, and that allowed people to use an alphabet board. And they would say first part of the alphabet or second part, and then I'd blink, and then they'd say N-O-P-Q-R, and that's how I'd communicate with folks. Tubes were into me to feed me. I couldn't feed myself, food or drink. And as I mentioned, I couldn't breathe on my own. A ventilator machine kept me going. One of the terrifying moments of that experience was the first time mucus collected in the ventilator, and all sorts of bells and whistles went off, and they didn't have the time to explain to me that when they took the tube out to clean it, they would do it quickly and replace it. All I knew was they were removing the only thing that was keeping me alive. And I was in abject terror. Now, you're going to hear a setting of this psalm that is not like the usual musical settings. Most of the time you hear this psalm, Lord, send out your spirit, right? And it's real happy, right? And renew the face of the earth. What I came to discover in this psalm was this wonderful line, when you take away their breath, they perish and return to the dust from which they came. And that generated this particular piece. Now, I have to warn you, I have some friends who skip this whenever it comes on the album. There we go. Kind of eerie. And I hope you hear that the end, I will be glad in the Lord, is how adolescence becomes spiritual journey. You don't give up on the Lord. You don't give up on the relationship. You become clear-eyed about the woundedness of your life and the world, but with a sense that there is still a future and that the future is in God's hands. It's tough finding that. Now, final part. We move to maturity. And here, it seems to me the spiritual journey is to discover that grace heals and recreates the self according to God's design and in God's time. We may want to be saints on our timetable, but God does it in God's time. The Holy Spirit equips us to share in Christ's work of redeeming the world. And this is what makes us move from being do-gooders whose energies sap and fall to actual agapeic lovers who continue to do the work of the kingdom when our energies dissipate and disappear. When we can continue to act out of love that's based in will and not just in feeling. And finally, we find ourselves placed, according to Catholic imagination, in a community of agapeic lovers. We take our place in the community of the saints. Not the plaster saints, but the living saints. Those who, frankly, like Ryoko Uemura, learn how to care day after day after day. And the Catholic imagination? Here in maturity, I think the Catholic imagination has a passion for unity and integration, for bringing all of the aspects of the universe and the microverse together. What David Tracy, quoting Wallace Stevens, called the blessed rage for order. A delight in paradox. Remember when Gerard Manley Hopkins talked about the opposites and how they come together in the unity of God. And finally, an affirmation of the goodness of the world and humanity, even with the clear eyes of adolescence seeing its brokenness, wounded but not obliterated by sin, redeemed ultimately by the love of Christ. Now, the visual art I have for this is a person that you're going to recognize immediately, but what I want you to catch is that this is a pencil sketch and not a photograph. And let's spend a little time engaging this. The reason why I think it is so beautiful, why it so connects to the Catholic imagination for maturity, is not just because Mother Teresa is old, but look at what the artist has done. How she disappears into the black background. Do you see how her shoulders really don't have any form? They just kind of move. And then she arises, the sari, that white sari, arises out of that darkness. Then the face, that glorious roadmap where every act that she has done is marked on her face. You think for a second, this is never a face that the culture which looks at celebrity would ever point to. And yet, that's the face of radiant agapeic love. Look at the eyes. What the artist did is showed us eyes that have seen everything and are still open, wide, not hidden, and looking directly at the heart of the viewer. And I think what I really love is that the cross is there, but it's not the first thing that catches your eye. She bears the cross. I think that's wonderful. Now, Literature, this is the first time I'm going to do two things. I'm going to do a comparison. I'm going to talk about a magnificent piece of literature from the Greek heritage, which I think reaches the pinnacle of understanding. And then I'm going to show a slightly beyond pinnacle understanding from Gerard Manley Hopkins. Here we go. I don't have to even explain this one. This is one of the choruses from Sophocles' Antigone. This is, I cannot tell you how much I love this, and I hope you will too. You ready? Numberless are the world's wonders, but none more wonderful than man. The storm-gray sea yields to his prows. The huge crests bear him high. Earth, holy and inexhaustible, is graven with shining furrows where his plows have gone, year after year, the timeless labor of stallions. Numberless are the world's wonders, but none more wonderful than man. The light-boned birds and beasts that cling to cover, the lithe fish lighting their reaches of dim water, all are taken, tamed in the net of his mind. The lion on the hill, the wild horse, windy-maned, resigned to him, and his blunt yoke has broken the sultry shoulders of the mountain bull. Numberless are the world's wonders, but none more wonderful than man. Words also, and thought as rapid as air, he fashions to his good use. Statecraft is his, and his the skill that deflects the arrows of snow, the spears of winter rain. From every wind he has made himself secure. From every wind he has made himself secure. From all but one. In the late wind of death, he cannot stand. Do you hear it? The pinnacle. And yet, death is the final word. Welcome to the world of tragedy. Now, welcome to the contrasting vision. This is very difficult. I'm going to warn you right now. This is a very difficult poem, but I think I can set it up for you. First thing you need to know is Heraclitus, right? The great philosopher who holds that everything is in flux. You can't step twice into the same stream. Fire is the one reality because it's always burning everything up. Everything is in flux. All of creation is in flux. Now, next thing you need to know, here's the progress of thought. Clouds are in motion in the sky. That's the first thing he looks at. Secondly, there's all sorts of shadows that you're going to see as the wind moves tree limbs back and forth. Third thing you're going to see, that the wind changes mud, which has now taken the object of people's feet, marking it, or wheels that have walked through it. And then the mud gets that impression. The wind makes it all just stay. But then, of course, it dries it out, and it turns into dust and blows away. Right? Then you're going to see his conclusion, that everything, all created things and humanity, simply die. Everything. Everything is subject to Heraclitus' rule. All is caught up in the fire. But the resurrection, the core Christian belief, the resurrection, responds to this human world reality. Okay, you ready? Cloud puffball, torn tufts, tossed pillows flaunt forth, then Chevy on air-built thoroughfare. Heaven roisterers in gay gangs they throng, they glitter in marches. Down rough cast, down dazzling whitewash, wherever an elm arches, shive lights and shadow tackle in long lashes, lace, lance, and pear. Delightfully, the bright wind, boisterous, ropes, wrestles, beats earth bare, of yester tempests creases, in pool and rut peel parches, squandering ooze to squeezed dough, crust, dust, stanches, Starches, squadroned masks, and man marks, treadmire, toiled there, fruit fetid in it. Million fueled, nature's bonfire burns on. But quench her bonniest, dearest to her, her clearest selved spark, man. How fast his fire dint, his mark on mind is gone. Both are in an unfathomable, all is in an enormous dark, drowned. Oh, pity and indignation. Man-shape that shone sheer off to several, a star. Death blots black out. Nor mark is any of him at all so stark, but vastness blurs, and time beats level. Enough. The resurrection. A heart's clarion. Away, grief's gasping, joyless days, dejection. Across my foundering deck shone a beacon, an eternal beam. Flesh fade, and mortal trash fall to the residuary worm. World's wildfire leave but ash. In a flash, at a trumpet crash, I am all at once what Christ is, since he was what I am. And this jack joke, poor potsherd, patch, matchwood, immortal diamond is immortal diamond. That's the mature Catholic imagination. Everything death blots black out. Enough, the resurrection. Okay. So, last piece of music, and then the final reading. Last piece of music is a setting I did of Psalm 139. It's a kind of personal favorite of mine, I have to say. And I hope you can see this as something that comes from, I hope, a mature spirituality, I hope. If not, I hope you just see it as a good piece of music. So we come to the end of the exploration. And I want finally to conclude with the Bible. This is going to give us the title of the talk. This is also your invitation to enter into the spiritual journey with the Catholic imagination. As Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob. He struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but the one who strives with God, Israel. For you have striven with God and human beings and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, the face of God, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Welcome to the spiritual journey, when you grapple with God in the dead of the night, and he wounds you, and you will spend the rest of your life limping. But it is glorious. It is glorious, because you have seen the face of God and live to tell. Amen.
We do have time for questions, and I would like to, if you'd like, I think we're small enough that you can just stand up and state your question rather loudly. If you'd like to use the mic, you can. I do know a couple of you need to go, and so take this moment now to step out if you need to, that's fine. But the floor is open for questions. We have time for about 15, 20 minutes of questions.
Well, thanks. Actually, grade school. But see, I've got a whole other career as a classical composer that nobody ever hears of. Church music I started actually in high school. So, yeah.
And what instruments do you use in composition?
Well, now I actually do it all on computer. But then it's piano, keyboards, guitar.
With the keyboard
Yeah.
is attached to a computer?
Yeah. Actually, no, just the computer itself, because it gives the score, and then I can, by means of this thing, it can sample all orchestral instruments. So I can do a full orchestral score and play back kind of what it would sound like in real performance.
May I ask the name of that program?
Yeah, well, there are multiple ones. I use Finale. There's another one called Sibelius. Yeah.
You mentioned the word sample, and that's Bishop Sample.
Oh, yes. Out in Portland now, yeah.
There's a movement going on that's supposed to now stimulate you. And I noticed that there was a gloss on the congregation document. It's a pension song that they put.
Chant, yeah.
It was supposed to revise the text of the Roman missal, not all of the six.
Yeah.
So could you tell me what is this?
Oh yeah, it's well. To be really strict with you, the issue is that we've got two different translation documents. There was one called Comme le Prévoit that existed from the 60s until about 2000, and then a new document called Liturgiam Authenticam. And that's the reason why we had the form of the Roman Missal we were used to in English, and then this new form. There were basically new rules for translation that were set up. And since the word is antiphona ad introitum, neither one of them translated it accurately. It's really, the opening music is an antiphon for the entrance. So cantus introitus, right? Introitum would be the translation, but that is actually not what's in the Missal. Yeah.
It used to be introito, and the priest, ran the show from the beginning of the liturgy. But now, at least I understand, it should be introitus, and the priests don't like that.
Well,
Can we make a distinction about which priest you might be talking
yeah,
about?
exactly. Yeah. And actually, this is kind of, I'm going to be very straightforward on this one. It's one of the big differences between the pre-Vatican II, say the Missale Romanum 1570, which was in use up until about 1962, and then our present form, which was promulgated in 1969, 1970 Missal up until now. That one began, it says, Mass begins as the priest and his ministers approach the altar. The new one says, after the people have assembled, Mass begins. And that tiny little shift tells you volumes. In the first, it really was seen as fundamentally a clerical act, priest and ministers, priest and servers, most of us experienced it. I'm 61, so I'm old enough to remember intro ibo ad altare Dei, ad Deum quilitificat juventutem meum. I know that stuff. But the focus was on the priest and the servers, with the congregation engaging in prayer as he and the servers performed the liturgy. The post-Vatican II form of celebration really emphasizes the congregation's participation. After the faithful have assembled, Mass begins. Yeah. Yeah.
Recently, I heard a
Yeah.
presentation
Yeah.
from someone from the New Speak.
Oh, New Skeet, yeah.
And it was very clear the way it went that you got the entrance out of the church
Yeah.
and entered
Yeah.
into the church
Yeah.
as a group.
Yeah. Which makes perfect sense. Remember, New Skeet, of course, is Byzantine Rite, not Roman Rite, like we're used to. But of course, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. How did we get off onto liturgical topics all of a sudden? Yeah, go ahead.
Unless you become a child, you should not enter the kingdom. That sort of thing. Is there a sort of circularity
Yes.
to this, that at the end you come back to the
Yes.
wonder of the child and the gratuity, awareness of the gratuity of God and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think they all interpenetrate. That's how I experience it. But maybe that the center of gravity shifts at different point. But certainly maturity is going to mean that you both have that clear-eyed awareness of the brokenness of self and world, but still with the wonder that it doesn't crush you, that you don't become a nihilist, that you don't despair, that it's all held somehow in grace. I mean, Bernanos's great thing in the Diary of a Country Priest, everything is grace. Everything is grace. But you can only get to that if you've got the clear-eyed. Otherwise, you're Pollyanna. And the Christian imagination is not Pollyanna-ish. Yep.
I'm going to put my GA on the spot, and I'm not going to make you say anything. But Margaret's has just finished a master's thesis looking at the woundedness of the body post-resurrection. Can you say something about that? I mean, it's kind of what your entire talk was about,
Yes.
but which is why she's here, I'm
Right.
assuming, but for many reasons. But can you say anything?
Well, I'd like to, may I speak homiletically?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's incredibly significant that the Johannine readings especially present the glorified Christ who shows the wounds. I think that is so important because what it tells us is he, as human being, takes seriously history. He enters into our history, and what is done to him is not erased. The resurrection is not an attempt to blot out history and start anew. It's not the social reconstructionists. It is a recognition of the woundedness of history, glorified. He shows the wounds as glory, because ultimately the wounds are the sign of his agapeic love. We're not masochists. We don't spend our time, rejoicing in his suffering. What we rejoice in is the fact that his love is so strong that he bears these things, which in turn manifest the glory of God through the wounds. That's my take on it. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
You could use that for defense tomorrow.
It's also, by the footnote, that's also, I think, why the Catholic imagination goes so strongly toward the Sacred Heart, why that devotion is so important, why we've got devotional material about the sorrowful mother, why we've got devotions about the wounds of Christ. They're not masochistic. People have, I think, misread that. I think it has much more to do with people recognizing in them their own experience of suffering being brought to the glorification of agape, I think. I could be wrong, but I'm frequently wrong.
Any other questions? Great.
Yeah.
In my civ class, we talk about like the interplay between music and religion.
Yeah.
Actually, would ask your opinion on something. Your opinion, like, how do you think the rules for composition for music and the role music plays in the church, how has that changed in modern times as opposed to like say 1,000 years ago?
Wow. Now, and so that I'm clear that I heard you correctly, you were asking about the role of music in religion or the rules? Oh, both. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna answer this in a kind of abstract way. Okay, there is something distinctive about Christian worship. So Catholic as a subset of Christian worship. And for us, I'm going to use the Greek on it, it's thusia logike. That shows up in the Greek New Testament, and it's called logike. We get the word logical from it. Sometimes it's translated rational worship or ordered worship. But here's the key. What's distinctive about our worship is it involves mind and heart. So that for us, usually worship is involving the scriptures. And the singing of Scripture is at the core of what we do. What that means is, unlike other religious traditions for whom music serves as trance, see, in other religious traditions you use music to reach this alternative state, you don't use mind. You try to circumvent mind by means of music. Or frenzy, which is really interesting. You can transports you one way. Frenzy transports you another way, so that you're able to undergo, say, ritual mutilation, and music becomes a way of doing that. But that's not characteristic of Christian music. Christian music is thusia logike. It always involves this logical, rational component, and I think that's distinctive. So the rules have shifted for Roman Catholics because for us, language has shifted. Over the last 50 years, we've begun to develop a vernacular repertoire, so the words are actually in the language we speak. And that's quite a change from the last 1,000 years or so. Is that helpful? Okay. Yeah.
There's a paradox there that I think is worth mentioning, and that is, inasmuch as music, especially sacred music or church music, engages mind and heart, the point of it is to touch the transcendent,
Yes. Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
beyond mind and heart.
Right.
So you engage the one in order to not divorce yourself from it, but to go beyond it. And that's what, how do I say it? Really good church music does that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hope.
And you hope,
And
yeah.
you hope. You learn how to dispose yourself toward it because you can't control that. And honestly, that's part of the reason why our Catholic tradition so prizes chant. It's logike because it's based in a text, but frequently the text is so adorned by this cascade of notes. Do, mi, luz. Lord, right? So I hope you hear that, right? We've just said Lord, but the music allowed us to rapturously say Lord, right? And maybe that'll draw us into the transcendence. Maybe.
I'm going to suggest this because I'll let one more, because it's you, Dr. Grace.
I want to go back to the comment that you made about the vernacular
Yeah.
and church music in the vernacular in the
Yeah.
last 50 years. Given that people worship in the vernacular now, what role do you see for the treasury of church music that is not in the vernacular, and having a place for that when people won't understand what is being said by the language that poetry is
Yeah.
composed?
See, I'm one of those weird people who is actually committed to maintaining the sacred languages. So I teach Latin. And I know that's not going to be common among all Roman Catholics anymore. But I think there still should be, among educated Roman Catholics, an awareness of at least some standard texts. I don't think it's impossible for Roman Catholics to know a Greek text like Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, or for them to know repeated litanic forms like Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi miserere nobis. I don't think those are difficult for them to learn. And then they're open to some of the treasures of the polyphonic heritage. Now it's a little more difficult when you move to the credo, because you've got all of the articles of the Constantinopolitan Nicene Creed now set, and then you'd have to really know the Latin text and understand its movement to really. But then here comes the problem. The credo in the earlier form could have been done by the choir on behalf of the assembly, but the general instruction of the Roman Missal now makes it fairly clear that the assembly is to speak its faith, and the choir doesn't do it on behalf of the assembly, it does it with the assembly. So there doesn't appear to be a place for those musical forms in the Reformed rite. Now, does that mean that you can't celebrate Tridentan form? Sure you can, and then the music written for it would be appropriate to it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
What do you do in a situation where you want to do Mozart like or something?
Oh,
You do it.
perfectly. You do it. You do it. You do it.
It fits perfectly in place, but the
Yeah.
people in the pews might not know what you're singing.
Then what I normally do, I always recommend that there is worship aid of some sort with the Latin text and the translation right next to it. And in fact, my latest composition, second latest composition, is O Sacrum Convivium. So I did a version which has the Latin, but then an English translation as well, interacting with each other macaronically. Yeah, those are too beautiful to lose, frankly. So is that? Yeah.
As one chorus ends, another begins.
Exactly. Exactly.
What I'd like to do, and this, because this always happens, as soon as we say we're done, a million of you will come up and have questions for
That's
Father
fine.
Joncas. There's a reception next door, so I invite all of you to come next door. We have a ton of food. So if you don't come, I will hunt you down and kill you. No, seriously, please come by next door. Again, join me in thanking Father Joncas for